Okay, well, thank you everybody for being here and welcome to our first ACSME national webinar. In this new world that we live in, it's great to have everybody on the call. Normally we're meeting in a room in Sydney. It's great that we can bring all of you together from all over the country and we can all focus on a really important topic as we're going to do today. So thank you all for being here. We've actually got big plans to turn our Australia-China SME Association into a national organisation because in a way this crisis gives us a great opportunity to do that. So please watch this space for more. And it's great to see so many familiar faces online, people I haven't seen for a while, like Tom, who I regard as an expert on this topic. So it's great to have you here. Rowan and others, and thank you for being here. It's great to see you all. Now, just before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. So if possible, please keep your camera turned on because it's just great to see everyone's faces so we know that you're all there. I suggest you use speaker view when Tracy's speaking because it's just easier to see what's happening. She'll have a few slides to go through. We're recording the session, so we can provide the recording to those who couldn't make it. If you could all turn to mute now, that would be helpful, I think, just to avoid any background noise. Please feel free to use the chat and Q&A, or the chat function at the bottom, so that if you want to make a comment or raise a question that we can cover a bit later on, please go ahead and do that in the chat. And of course, bearing in mind how hard it is to speak at a session like this, maybe I could encourage you to use the reactions button, which is at the bottom right. And you probably know if you click on there, there are two. There's the clapping and the thumbs up. So perhaps we could see a few, just a little practice. Very good. A few more, please. So please feel free to use that as a sort of acknowledgement that you're enjoying what you're listening to, or there's been a good point made. And I know that Tracy and Polly, who are going to speak a bit later, will appreciate lots of thumbs ups when the time comes. And then finally, I promise that we'll finish at 2 o'clock sharp. So don't worry, we're definitely going to finish at 2. But please stay to the end because there's a next step that I'd like to offer you, which we'll come to at the very end. So please be there right at the end so that I can give you all the chance to do this. And we'll do that in the wrap up at the very end. But rest assured, we'll finish at 2 so you can be away by then. Now, today's topic, which is cultural intelligence, or CQ, which we're going to talk about. Now, from my experience, and having taken a lot of businesses into China and Asia, having lived in Asia, having operated in Asia, when trying to do business deals and get things done, I think it's really important that we understand a lot about the cultural issues. In fact, I would go far as to say that CQ, or cultural awareness understanding, is often the breaker between a successful deal or a not successful deal, and we don't really spend enough time talking about it, which is why I've devoted this whole session to CQ, and I'm raising the importance of it for all of us. And I'm delighted to have two great speakers here from the leadership group. Now, I'd like to just quickly explain the leadership group is a group in China that I've known for a long time, founded by a good friend of mine called Jeremy Perks. And for many years, they've done great work in Asia, working with multinational companies in China particularly, and working with the leaders of those businesses, and obviously dealing with cross-cultural communication, diversity of teams, and helping leaders become very effective at CQ. So it's great to have two of their senior coaches with us today. We've got Tracy Driscoll in Port Macquarie, and we've got Polly Tan, in Kuala Lumpur. Now Tracy I've been working with lately. She's moved back to Australia after living for 23 years in Beijing as an Australian. So you can imagine that she's had some great experiences which she's going to share with us. She's had 7 years as the head of coaching for the leadership group. So she's worked with many of the leaders of big multinational companies operating, particularly in China. And she's transformed the lives of many of those business leaders through being their leadership coach. And so I know you're going to get a great deal of value from listening to Tracy. And recently I've got to know Polly Tan. And although we've only met recently, I've already felt the great passion she has for this topic of cross-cultural communication and understanding. She spent the last 35 years coaching in Asia and 5 years living in Beijing. She did her PhD in Queensland, which included, amongst other things, cross-cultural psychology. So you can see that she has enormous depth in this topic and a lifelong passion for learning about cultural intelligence. She's the leadership group's in-house coaching expert on CQ, and she's had a great deal of experience working with the leaders of multinational teams in Asia. So maybe we could start by me kicking over to Tracy, but as I do so, perhaps we could all have a show of hand clapping, and that would be a great way to get Tracy started. So thank you to everyone for being here. Welcome, Tracy.
谢谢, David.
谢谢.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for organizing this, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and also for giving me the opportunity to work again with Polly, my dear colleague. We used to be in Beijing at the same time, but Polly moved away several years ago and I left just last year. So as David mentioned, I had 23 years in Beijing. Loved my experience living in China. So I have a lot of good reasons for wanting to do this work, actually. Firstly, I'm part of a multicultural family. My husband is from Beijing, born and bred. My 2 daughters were born there, and they're recently moving to Australia. So for me, it is really important that the world in the future is a place that's very open-minded and provides a lot of equal opportunity. And I think I feel that a lot more coming back to Australia than I did actually in what was a very international community in Beijing. So China opened my eyes in so many ways. But one of the things that I really realized, particularly in the last 10 years doing the work that I do with big multinational companies, we are becoming a global village. And more now than ever, I realize that we are all standing on this same little planet. And what they do over there affects us, and what we do over here affects them. And more than ever, we need to break down the borders and realize that we need to communicate, we need to collaborate, and we need to work together if we want to secure the future of this planet. And from my perspective, cultural awareness and connection between cultures is a really crucial part of that. Now, I'm not as expert as Polly in this topic, but as you can see, I've lived the topic and I've worked with diverse teams for a long time. So I do hope that the experience I've had through sharing it with you and through working more on this topic, I can bring something on this topic to Australia. So that's why I'm here today. I'm quite passionate about it, and actually David's helped me to get onto this path as well and realize actually how much I do know on the topic. So thanks again, David. So I guess there's one other thing. We asked you to do a poll before the workshop, and actually I'm just going to share my screen quickly to show you the results of the poll, because actually we have quite a bit of diversity in the room today. So what you can see here are 3 charts. One of the questions was where you were born. So of the people who signed up for the webinar today, 40% of us were born outside Australia. We also asked what nationality were people's parents. 63% of people who signed up today have parents who were born outside Australia. But even so, most of us identify as being Australian, at least 62%. But isn't it interesting, just looking at all the colors on those charts, to realize that even in this room, we're a pretty diverse community. And I think that's the other thing that I really noticed, particularly coming back after 23 years. Walking down the street in Sydney or Melbourne, it is a really diverse population now. And I don't know that we really embrace it as we could. So that's something that I'm interested in exploring as well. Now, something else, my main area of expertise this last decade has been leadership development, organization effectiveness, and team effectiveness. I'll just stop this for a second. And but through that, as I mentioned, I was working with a lot of multinational companies who were doing business in China, and their joint venture partners. And what I realized now that I was doing was I was working with very diverse teams. And one of the biggest issues for diverse teams is understanding each other and getting alignment and then being able to execute together. And what I've realized is that coming back to Australia, leaders are pretty well developed, but they're missing that aspect of what I call CQ, which is cultural intelligence. And I realized we use a model quite often called the 4Qs for essential skills for leaders, and that there was this extra Q that was missing. I don't know, a lot of you guys in the room are leaders. Have put up your hand if you have heard of the 4Qs before. Okay, only a couple actually. All right, so let me just do a very short intro. Actually, I'm going to show you what the 5 Qs are and talk about cultural intelligence, but as part of that, I'll also show you what the 4 Qs are. Okay, so the 4 Qs, essential skills for all leaders. You need, as a leader, you need to be developing your IQ, which is your intellectual intelligence. And what this really means is that leaders need to be learning, growing, developing, not only to stay ahead of the curve, but also to stay motivated, inspired, and just, you know, good role models for their teams. EQ, we've heard a lot about that. It's emotional intelligence. And it's important because leaders need to be able to manage their emotions, but they also need to be able to have really good, healthy relationships. They need to show compassion and empathy and connect well with other people. PQ is the next one. Physical intelligence. This is a no-brainer really for most leaders, but surprisingly, I spend a lot of time coaching on this. Leaders are usually so busy that they often forget their PQ. Yeah. To eat properly, to sleep properly, to exercise, look after their body. Without PQ, it's pretty hard to have really good IQ and EQ. Now, the fourth one, spiritual intelligence. Not many people think of this one straight away, but it's actually really crucial and foundational as well. It's about your personal integrity, knowing who you are, knowing your values, knowing your purpose, walking your talk, knowing how to recharge your batteries. It's different things for different people. So it might be walks in nature, it might be meditation, it might be family, whatever it is. But leaders need to be doing these 4 things in order to be showing up well. But as we can see, cultural intelligence is the missing piece. In this world that we now live in, which even in the last couple of months has gotten much more global now that we're all online and can be in the same room from many different countries at the same time, cultural intelligence is something that we all need to be mindful of and work on, actually. because it doesn't come naturally. So what is it? It's a awareness and appreciation of cultural differences and commonalities. It's caring to have connection with people from other cultures. It's showing understanding. It's having patience with differences, and it's having curiosity and openness. So that's our topic for today. And I think what I really came to do is share a little bit more about my experience in China, my personal journey of cultural awareness. You know, over the years, I went through many different stages with cultural awareness. When I first went to China, I was a foreigner and I was the one that stood out. And I'd never been overseas before. So for me, that was a big eye-opener. Over the years, I kind of went through a lot of stages with adapting to living in China. But the last 10 years has been really, really rewarding, working with these big companies and seeing the challenges that they face to do with cultural awareness. The one I want to talk about today is BMW. I've worked, well, both Polly and I have worked a lot with BMW, me for at least 6 or 7 years and Polly for longer, actually. Why BMW? Because they've been on this journey for an awfully long time. And I do think that they display a lot of elements of best practice in this area. BMW realized 20 years ago that diversity was going to be the key for their long-term sustainability. Why? There were 3 big internal drivers for that. The obvious one is that they're a global company led by mainly German leaders. And those German leaders didn't necessarily understand the markets in which they were operating, which were all around the world. So in order to understand their customers better and to provide the customers with what they want so that they can sell more, they needed to diversify their leadership. Number 2, as some of you probably know, there's a global race going on right now among all the automobile companies, and not only the auto companies, now the tech companies as well, to come up with what is the solution for mobility in the future. A lot of people believe that automobiles will not be our main mode of transport in 50 years. So what's it going to be? This is what they're all competing for. And that requires innovation. And all the research and data shows us clearly that in order to innovate, we need to have different perspectives. We need to have people from different backgrounds in the room. So diversity is crucial for innovation. And the third thing, BMW want to be the best. They don't hide that. That's their mission. Be the best, be number 1. So in order to be the best, they have to have the best people working with them. And the best people want to work for organizations that have equal opportunity. And if they don't, they're going to go somewhere else. So they have to, in order to attract the best talent pool and have the best people and achieve their goals, they have to put attention on diversity. And besides that, it's just the right thing to do. I think we all know that, and they know that too. But there was also one really big external driver for this push on diversity, and that's shareholders. Shareholders know that long-term sustainability depends on diversity, and so they require the company to be showing what they're doing about this. Stock markets are requiring it. Since 2013, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange requires companies to have a diversity protocol and to publish it in order to be listed. BMW were early to the game here. The Dow Jones Sustainability Index is a lot about diversity and proving what you're doing for your long-term sustainability around diversity. So BMW made that a goal. We want to be number 1. So from 2005 to 2012, BMW were number 1 on that Dow Jones Sustainability Index for their work around diversity. So they've really done a lot. And the interesting thing is that it's no quick fix. And even though they've done a lot already, they're still not there and they're still working on it. But the types of programs that Polly and I were running, leadership think tank, leadership platform programs with their top teams. And you've got to understand the numbers in China as well. Like BMW itself is massive, but their joint venture partner, BBA, is even more massive. They have 2 factories in Shenyang with over 10,000 people in each factory. So just imagine the number of leaders we're dealing with and the dozens and dozens of programs that we did every year. And a big element of those programs was understanding diversity. So a little bit, the story that I just told you was what we were teaching in some of those programs, helping people to understand the why. Yeah, you've got to understand why this is important to want to do it. I mean, it was massive to convince them that this was necessary, and then also to start the process of hiring and developing Chinese leaders that could grow up and make those top teams more diverse. Not only that, they were trying to attract leaders from other countries as well to come and work in China. So, you know, that's a massive amount of work. The other thing we're doing in the programs is helping people to understand the cultural differences and to really talk about them. So look at German culture and the culture of BMW traditionally in Germany. Look at Chinese culture and the history of BMW in China and the culture that's been developed here as a result. And look where they cross over and see where there are commonalities, and look at the differences and talk about it. And which things make us stronger for having both and which things don't. What other cultures do we need to consider? We're not only working in China, we're selling to Asia. So there was just a lot of topics. And the fact that they created the time and the space for this in their leadership programs shows how important it was to them, but also it put them ahead of the game, because I don't think a lot of companies are doing that yet. So I know a lot of you are working in smaller companies, but I also know that you're facing the same challenges as BMW, because as I said before, when you walk out in the street in Australia, in Sydney or in Melbourne, or most of our cities now, customers come from diverse backgrounds. So there's 3 things we can learn from BMW. We have to understand our customers and where they come from, and we need to make sure that we have diversity in our thinking and in our leadership and in our teams, so that we can understand our customers and connect with them. If we want to be innovative and stay ahead of the curve, we need to embrace diversity. It's the future, and it's necessary. And the third thing is we need to educate ourselves, and we need to educate our people. And that takes time, energy, resources, and making it a priority. So yeah, that's the BMW story. But how do we now begin this journey? So, you know, 6 months ago when I started working a bit with David and really looking at this topic and seeing what the journey ahead was for me, now that I'm back here and actually I'm experiencing that kind of strange cultural experience again. After being away for 23 years, I feel like a tourist back here in Australia. But, you know, I'm settling in. It's okay. And so are my daughters and my husband. They're doing pretty good. But I realized that I needed to go on a different type of journey now. And so I thought the first person I need to speak to is Polly. She's my expert, and I know that she does this great assessment on cultural awareness. And I decided I needed to do that. And I suggested that David should do that too. It's called the International Development Inventory. Intercultural Development Inventory, IDI. Because I wanted to get a snapshot of where I'm at. 23 years in China, I thought I must be doing okay, but I wasn't really sure. And being a coach, I know that in order to develop, I need to understand where my gaps are and my blind spots. And I thought probably that I have some unconscious bias, but I actually know from having lived in a different culture for so long, I have some pretty conscious biases as well that I still work on a day-to-day basis. So I thought it would be good to have Polly here today just to explain the IDI model, because I think it's it really, like when I saw it and I looked at it again, I connected with it so much because it really explains a lot about the journey I've been on. So I'll get her to introduce the model, and then David and I are bravely going to share our profiles with you.
Okay, good. Thank you, David, and thank you, Tracy. Thank you, everybody, for spending this very meaningful moment with us and sharing one of my biggest passion, that is intercultural development, and also having the opportunity to share one of the assessments that I use, IDI, that I have been using for the past, since 2007, I think. Yeah, that long ago. And I'm not going to talk about the technicality and the theoretical underpinnings of it. Just would like to explain to you and share with you the power of this instrument or the assessment, right? And let me start with like introducing you the whole picture. Now, if you look at the screen now, as you can see, there are two extreme ends: monocultural mindset and intercultural mindset, right? There are two big topic there. Under monocultural mindset, there are two orientations. One is denial, another one is polarization. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. And the other extreme end, intercultural mindset, there are also two orientation: acceptance and adaptation. In the middle, somewhere in the middle, is called minimization. At this orientation, this stage, it is the breaking point or the tipping point, right, of the whole continuum, right? So let me walk you through the whole continuum and also explain to you why it is my favorite. It is my favorite because there are hundreds and hundreds of assessments in the market on assessing cultural differences, cultural intelligence, and all that. But what I like about this one is like it is measuring the vertical mindset. The rest of the knowledge and skills, the horizontal knowledge and skills, for instance, the do's and don'ts of business etiquette, how to build relationship, how to build trust, how communication style, etc. They're all like knowledge and skills, right? And you can easily learn that by reading a book or by talking to colleagues. But what we are advocating is like at this 21st century, leadership development or personal development is the mindset, right? The mindset growing, expanding the mindset. And IDI just does that according to my opinion, right? So let me walk you through, and I find that this is the most important thing and is very transformational and is a very beautiful journey as well. Let me walk you through the whole journey and explain to you and give you some example, okay? At the extreme end, what we call denial. At denial, this group of people tend not to have a lot of exposure to people from different cultures, or they have not really worked or lived abroad before. Therefore, they are not so comfortable when they are exposed to different cultures. Okay, so therefore they miss differences. Okay, and they also don't have a lot of interest in understanding, and therefore they kind of deny that this is not important. I give you an example, and one of the Hong Kong leader that I met, and when she shared with me, she said that, you know, when she looked at the profile and she mentioned that when she got on into a bus or when she is at work, she tend not to sit with people from Pakistan or Bangladesh because she doesn't feel comfortable at all. So she tends to want to sit with people who look similar to her because she is really feeling not comfortable at all. So that is the group of people in denial group. Moving forward is polarization. Now, in polarization, there are two types of orientation. One is defensive and reversal. I repeat, defensive and reversal under polarization. And let me explain defensive. And both of these orientation, they judge difference. Okay, defensive orientation people tend to say that my culture is better than yours. My culture is more superior than yours. Okay. In contrast, reversal orientation is saying that your culture is better than mine. I like your culture. I don't like my culture because it's less superior. Let me give you an example in the Malaysian context. As you know, Malaysia is made out of Malay, Chinese, Indians, and the others. And in the business setting, for instance, the Chinese businessmen tend to stereotype negatively about the Malay businessmen. And they tend to say that they judge that the Malay businessmen tend to be lazy, they are very slow in responding, not so efficient. And likewise, the Malay businessmen will say something, stereotype the Chinese businessmen as like too ambitious, money crazy, no materialistic and things like that. Therefore, it's something very negative, right? It's judging. In the reversal example, again in the Malaysian context, for instance, some of the Malay business people like to work with the Malaysian Chinese businessmen because they say that, Chinese way of doing business perhaps is more efficient. Therefore, I want to learn because my Malay way of doing business is not as efficient. Therefore, your culture is better than mine in reversal. So in this polarization is a lot of judging and defensive and judging. Okay? Right, let's move on to minimization. Like I said, this is the middle ground that is a breaking place between monocultural and intercultural. In minimization, this group of people tend to have a lot of knowledge in cultural differences and similarities. They tend to either have lived abroad for a long time or worked in overseas for a long time as well. Therefore, they tend to have reasonable amount of knowledge on business etiquette, communication skills, different knowledge in policies, educational system, and so on and so forth. However, because of their knowledge in that extent, they kind of de-emphasize difference because they have a mindset which emphasize cultural commonalities or universal values. Eventually, they say that everybody is the same. We are all human beings, right? We are all human beings. Therefore, we should treat everybody the same. Let me give you an example. Like what Tracy has mentioned, right? In BMW, we have German leaders and Chinese counterparts as well. And a lot of some of these German leaders will share with me, Polly, I have a diverse team, and every time I have meeting, I give equal opportunity to everybody to speak up. I want to be fair to everybody. Therefore, everybody will have the same opportunity to speak up. However, my Chinese counterpart tend not to speak up. Therefore, I'm very frustrated. So they understand the whole Chinese business etiquette, but they're kind of minimize or masking some of the deep cultural difference in this aspect, for instance. Okay, let me move on to acceptance. Now, people at acceptance tend to become very curious and they want to learn about the deep cultural knowledge and skills, and they tend to suspend their judgment and they want to know more. Okay, let me give you an example. The BMW German leaders just now was talking about in minimization. If they move up to acceptance, this is when they say, hey, I want to understand why my Chinese counterpart do not speak up in meeting. They are not comfortable in voicing up. And this leader may find out that, oh, okay, maybe Chinese values, they tend to value harmony. They are not very comfortable to talk about personal opinion. And especially in front of their bosses, coming from a very hierarchical society. So when people are acceptance, they kind of understand that, but they do not know how to solve the problem. They understand the difference, they understand where it comes from, but they do not know how to solve it. How do I encourage my Chinese colleagues to speak up personally in the meeting, for instance? So people at this acceptance, they understand, but they don't know how to solve the problem. Moving up to adaptation, this is where these group of people, they tend to have like bicultural lens or multicultural lenses. They're able to bridge the gaps of the two extremes and make more neutral judgment of views. Again, back to this BMW leader, German leaders, once they understand why Chinese perhaps colleagues are not comfortable of speaking up, when they're acceptance, they don't know how to like solve the problem, but when they move to adaptation, they are able to. So they understand that, some of the strategies or some of the ways to encourage Chinese counterparts to speak up is to talk to them personally, one-to-one, getting them to speak privately, or email them or tell them in advance in a meeting, get them to have some time to prepare so that they're able to adapt to this open meeting, open sharing, personal voice kind of meeting. So, and leaders at this adaptation also tend to become the bridge for two cultures. For instance, when I was in Singapore, I hear a lot of Singaporean Chinese like kind of make negative remarks or complain about the Chinese from China. They say that these Chinese from China, they don't queue and they're very loud. And if your adaptation and you understand both cultures, you tend to want to explain to them to bridge there in that sense that, a lot of Chinese speak very loudly. It's not that they want to quarrel or they are rude. It's just, especially from the northern China, they tend to be very passionate. They want to show their passion, so they speak very loudly. And this is their way of showing that I want to be your friend and I'm passionate about you and your topic. Cool. So I encourage you to walk this beautiful journey with me. It's like Tracy said, it's not one time you can fix everything, and it's a transformational journey which I have experienced and is really beautiful. So thank you. Over to you, Tracy.
Thanks, Polly. So yeah, it was really interesting to go back and revisit this model with Polly, because when I think about my own journey, I can almost plot it out on this path. I remember my husband and I met 22 years ago, and we got married, I think, in 2000. There you go. So quite a long time ago. But I remember the first few years, people used to say to me, "Oh, these intercultural relationships are so difficult. Yeah, it must make it really hard." And I was completely in denial. I was like, no, we're just people. All people have difficulties in relationships, and it's just about the people. And of course it took me a few years to move beyond that, but having children, that really changed things, because then you see that actually we grew up in a completely different mindset. We look at parents and families differently, and yeah, it was quite an awakening. So that, even just that shift from denial to minimization, that took me quite a few years. So I'm about to share my profile with you. Let's see where I got to after 23 years in China. This is my family, by the way. This is my husband, Bishang, and on the right here, my daughter, Mila, who's 12, and Jasmine, who's 9. So this is my intercultural orientation. Now, what the IDI shows is it shows you what you think your IDI is, and it shows you where you're actually at. So my perceived orientation is 130. I think I'm adapted. I clearly want to be a bridge between the two cultures, but actually in reality, I'm not there yet. I'm back here, still in minimization, moving slowly towards acceptance. I totally get that, because I am one of those people that just thinks, we're all essentially the same. We're all people. We're all on the same page. And it's taken me a long time to admit that the differences are important, and to actually spend time getting to know about the differences. So this has been quite an awakening for me recently. Now I've also got David's profile here. David, is it okay if I show them yours now?
Yes, go on.
So as you know, David's been working with China, across 2 continents for many years. David, tell us what you saw or how it felt when you got your IDI.
Yes, no, I was a bit disappointed. So I expected to be up at the sort of 130 kind of mark. And certainly that was my perceived orientation. But, you know, like you, I was sort of, I was measured more in the minimization zone, suggesting that whilst I recognize differences and maybe I can comfortably deal with those differences, maybe I'm still using tactical methods to get across it rather than actually accepting and adapting. And so I found that an interesting process as well.
Yeah. And I think the key realization is, well, it's pretty obvious really. These kind of shifts are not quick. It takes a long time to go on this journey. But unless you shed light on where you are on the journey, then you're probably not going to be able to do work in the right way. So this was really great for me to do this, to see where I'm at. And even since I did it, I can see so many things now that I didn't see before. You know, it always happens at home for me. You know, I've known for years some of the big differences, like in the kitchen, for example. Kitchens in China are pretty small. There's not a lot of space. So when I cook, I like everybody else to be out and to just have the kitchen to myself. It's not like that for my husband. When he likes to cook, he likes me to be in there, maybe one of the kids to be in there too, and we become his assistants, but we're also there for conversation and company. So cooking is a collective exercise there. So just really recognizing that and understanding what different people need can help you to get around some of the cultural misunderstandings and difficult communication that you can have when people don't understand why you want them out. So I think looking at that, you're probably having thoughts yourself about where you are at on this continuum. So what I'd like to do now is just give you 5 minutes in a breakout group. We'll probably have 3 or 4 people in a breakout group. I want you to just take 5 minutes and share with the other people in the group where you think you are at on the continuum and why. And when you come back, we'll hear a couple of the stories. So just a moment while I set up the breakout rooms.
And Tracy, while we're in the breakouts, just to have a quick look at some of the questions that are coming through, because there's some good questions there we could touch on later.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, if you can keep an eye on that for me, then when we come back, we'll have a bit of a discussion and answer some questions as well. Okay, off you go. Hi, starting to come back. All right. Good. So I did pop into one of the other rooms and hear what people were talking about.
Cool.
Some very interesting discussions.
Indeed.
Well, in our group, we actually have Fek Yen, who actually has done the IDI assessment. So
great.
She would be a good person to feed back some comments.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Peg and I worked together in China for a while as well, so we know each other.
Great.
Yeah. Hi, Tracy.
There you go. Hi. With Meg.
Yeah? Yes.
Yes.
In
A lot of familiar faces.
Thought so.
Yeah.
All right. Would you like to share?
Okay. In our group, we talk about where we are at the from our own perceptions on the IDI continuum, and we have we have Angus perceived himself at towards the adaptations. For myself, I am at the minimizations based on my 2 years ago IDI assessment. Yeah, so that's kind of also a reflections for myself, because I've lived in China Beijing for 15 years, although I'm originally Malaysian, which I expect to know Chinese a lot, which in fact it's not that case. So it's very similar, like you and David. Yeah, so it's kind of like also kind of awakenings how our mindset is when we deal with cultural differences. Yeah, so I tend to minimize, like tends to enlarge on the similarity, then minimize the differences, like myself with the Chinese. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pick randomly now. Boris, would you like to share? What did you hear in your group, or maybe just talk about yourself?
I think we were had a general consensus that very much where you fit on that continuum depended upon the culture you were framing it to. And we weren't quite certain as to whether the question was around China specifically or just generally speaking. And I got some positive feedback on where I compared it to, say, I could put myself on a completely different part of the continuum, say with the US, then also with the Middle East, where I find some things confronting my values much more, where I might be further down on the continuum, and then some other cultures. So we weren't quite certain there.
That's a good point. Yeah.
There was some head nodding as well to the last point there just before the breakout closed, where with your experience in, I guess, coaching the bridging between cultures, you must have a fairly good sense of what you consider to be the Australian culture. And so I'm very curious to hear that, particularly with the pie charts you flashed up, given the diversity that we have in terms of cultural diversity. And I guess I'm at the end of my tolerance. I resent hearing what it is to be un-Australian, because I feel it's so easy to say what isn't. And to hear, I guess, a bit of a soundbite from you as to what you think sort of characterises to be Australian. And do you vary that given in different contexts?
I will. I'll pick that one up for a few minutes, because I mean that it's been such an eye opener to me coming back, what it means to be Australian. And I said earlier that I felt like a bit of a tourist coming back, because I'm kind of just rediscovering what that is. And I actually a month ago went and read some websites about what it says to be Australian, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what it is. You know, there's stuff that I resonate with, like, you know, I grew up in Kyogle, a very small town in northern New South Wales. I grew up on a farm, so I come from rural Australia. So what it means to be Australian for me is, you know, fathers that work on a farm and lots of big family barbecues, and relatives up in Queensland on even bigger properties. And it's kind of a traditional rural Australian culture that I grew up in. So that's part of it. But the culture in the city is quite different. And it's much more open-minded. It's much more diverse. It's much more multicultural. And I lived in that for a while as well. I lived in Sydney. I lived in Melbourne. I lived in Perth, which wasn't quite as diverse way back then. But yeah, coming back and then living in China, you kind of become more Australian in some ways and less Australian. Like I actually experienced what Polly was describing in the polarization thing about not wanting to identify with Australia as other Australians in China, because I found some of their behaviors to be really quite repulsive and really unculturally aware. So for me, it's really interesting to ask that question, what is it to be Australian? But what I've realized is, you know, if I think about the really wonderful qualities about Australians, They're generally very open and friendly and welcoming, but not necessarily completely culturally aware. And that's, I guess, the task ahead of me, understanding that and helping people through that. And I heard in our group, actually, someone saying, you know, it's a little bit about your willingness to explore and whether you need to or not. And certainly it was like that for me in China. I only did what I needed to do to get along. There's a saying with the minimalization aspect that you go along to get along. So yes, I'll go and I'll try more Chinese food. I'll hang out with their families and I'll do this and I'll do that because that's going to make it easier for me to be here. But at the beginning, it was hard to push myself out there and do that, get outside of my comfort zone. And you know, it was not always interesting to me. But over time, it becomes easier. And over time, your curiosity grows and you learn and you step out more. And I think that's the journey that we need to go on if we're going to develop cultural awareness. First, we need to do it, then be willing to do it, and then actually make ourselves do it. And you would think that I have the best motivation in the world, yeah? More harmony in my family by going on this journey, but I don't always have the appetite for it. We're only human. But certainly I know now better what I need to do. And I just doing this and having this realization, it's like shining the light on a dark spot. It's like, I didn't even see that I was doing that before, but now I see it. I'm much more able to change it. And I guess that will take us on actually to the next bit. Actually, before I share the next slide, I think the point is what Polly was saying. This journey of establishing more cultural awareness is a vertical journey. It's not a horizontal journey. We can all learn skills to help us, you know, with cross-cultural communications and stuff like that. But really the vertical journey is a mindset shift. We need to think differently. We need to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And we need to understand what we are doing and what we're not doing in order to be able to make that shift. So I will share my screen now and show you something that I've come up with that I think will help with this. Oh, where did my... There it is. Okay. So this is, it's actually a mindfulness technique that I teach in leadership. You've probably heard a lot about mindfulness, but I've applied it to the CQ model because really the shift that we need to make, the mindset shift that we need to make, is to go from judging into a more neutral mindset. So that when we see things that we don't necessarily understand or agree with right away, we're not judging. We're not going straight to a kind of defensive or reactive mode. That we're just looking at it, observing it, and going, and being more neutral and more objective about it. So in order to be able to do that, first you have to know when you're doing it. So you have to become really conscious and start noticing and realizing when you're doing it. So you have to be very present for that. You have to be looking for it. Then once you notice that you're doing it, you actually have to say, I'm doing it. Stop. That's not what I want to be doing. That's not how I want to show up. That doesn't really reflect my true values and who I am as a person. Stop. And then consciously you can choose how you want to react, or you can respond rather than react. So you can choose a more neutral stance. And you've heard the old saying of faking it till you make it. The first few times you try this, it's going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to feel like you're faking it. But if it's really important to you and you really need to do it for whatever reason in your company or for your business to be better, for your relationships or your friendships to be better, then you will have some motivation to try it and do it. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets. So with this mindfulness technique, try it several times a day, every day, for a whole month, and you will absolutely experience a transformation. Not many people have the discipline to do that. So even if you just try practicing it a couple of times a day, you will start to notice a shift after a while. There's a really, here's a story, my minimization coming out. Well, actually, no, this was probably my denial coming out. But when I first moved to China, one of the most difficult things was the spitting and the hacking, spitting on the street. And it was like, oh, it was just so offensive to me. It was like, can't they see that it's spreading germs? And, you know, I don't want to stand in your spit on the street and that sort of thing. And, you know, my reaction was very judgmental. And you can even hear the kind of passion that comes out when I talk about it now. But after 23 years in China, it hardly phases me. I hardly even notice when people do it around me now. But it was a long journey to go from that to this. But I think in the middle of it, I had some realizations, and I had a lot more understanding about what the differences are between the people that I was living with and where I'd come from. So for starters, this had been part of the culture for 1,000 or more years. This was not something that they just started doing when I arrived in China. This has been the way they were brought up. And they don't notice that it's happening, and it's not a big deal to them. So I started to have to put myself in others' shoes and understand that this, where they were coming from was just very different to where I was coming from. And I've had some really funny conversations with taxi drivers over the years about stuff like this. And one of the things they said to me is how disgusting they think it is when we pull out these white things and we blow our nose into it really loudly, and how horrible that is. And they can't understand why we would do that. It's just such a disgusting habit. So, you know, you've always got to understand that the shoe can be on the other foot very quickly. But anyway, noticing when you're having that reaction, that strong judgment, that strong emotion, understanding that actually that's not how you want to be. You want to be more neutral. You want to be understanding. You want to be that bridge, and then choosing to go there. Something we can do. Other things we can do. Oh, actually, I wanted to show you this slide. This, to me, it really explains my position in minimization, but just take a minute to have a look at this picture. So I think as minimists, myself, David, Peck, we identify with that equality thing. We think that it should be equal for everybody. And we think we are making it equal for everybody. But actually, we're kind of missing a point, that not everybody is the same as we are. And it's the differences that are important. If we really want to create equality, it's equity we're going for, not. And we have to think differently. We have to recognize the differences and be able to create some bridges there. So I like that one. And it's really about connecting below the waterline. And this is where, you know, you've got to have the need to do it, I guess. It's not difficult to do the visible stuff. You've seen the old iceberg picture 1,000 times. And when it comes to culture, you know, the stuff above the waterline, different foods, different languages, different way of dressing, different customs, yeah? Or behaviors, I should say. Go below the waterline, it's built on a lot more than that. It's the way we're brought up in our family, the way we think about life, it's our values, it's our assumptions, it's our beliefs. If you really want to build a bridge, you've got to be willing to go below the waterline and connect at a deeper level. And how do you do that? Well, you've got to make friends. You've got to interact. When I think about the leaders at BMW who are really doing it well, and they were crossing over, and their teams were really all on the same page and moving in the same direction. They'd put in a lot of effort to get to know their people, having lunch with them, eating their food, understanding about their friends, understanding about their hobbies, spending time with their families. It takes a lot of effort. It's no quick fix. It's a journey, and it takes commitment and discipline to be able to cross that bridge. But when you do, it opens up, such a rich world, so many more relationships. I remember really making my first true Chinese friend. It took me a while to really be interested in a lot of the stuff that she was doing. But once we spent time together, had a few incredible experiences together, then it was no longer about that. And now, I've lived in her house for a month or two. She's lived in my house for a month or two. So we know each other intimately. And it taught me so much about my husband and about my Chinese family. And it's helped me so much. And I have such a bigger appreciation for the cultural differences now than I used to have. But it took me a long time to go there, and a special type of person to make me want to go there, actually. So if you're thinking about your companies, whether it's a small business or a medium-sized business or whatever, I guess what you're asking yourself now is diversity important to me? And that's something you'll have to think about for yourself. If it is your team diverse enough? What do I need to do to make my team more diverse? Particularly around the culture piece is the bit we're talking about today, but there are other important types of diversity as well, as you know. But then if you do have a diverse team and it's more about the difficulty of crossing the bridge and helping them to work better together, then there's a few things that you can do. There's 3 things you can do. Actually, there's a load of things you can do, but these are all the things you can do. But the top 3, I think, is for companies who are really wanting to help with that diversity piece in their organization. Make it a strategic priority. Yeah. Understand that this is important for the future growth of your business and that it has to be a priority. But then you need to help your people to understand why this is a priority and communicate about it. So you need to provide time and resources to build the self-awareness around CQ. That's what BMW were doing by building this module into all of their leadership development programs. They were helping people to understand why it's important and how it would benefit them. They were also helping people to see where they're at on the journey and then understand what it takes to improve in this area. So it takes some investment. And then as a leader, really you need to role model what it takes to cross that bridge. So you need to be very open-minded and you need to be patient because it won't change overnight. It takes time. Here are quite a few other things that we can do. First, you've got to care. You can research, you can learn, you can try things out. Notice when you're judging or when you're being neutral and objective. Notice the differences and the commonalities. Journal about it. Understand the story that you're telling yourself here and then rewrite it. Connect below the waterline. And of course, you could always work with a coach. Now, I'm guessing there might be some other questions which have come up. David, is there anything else that you're seeing there that...
Yes, no, I think there are. Yeah, thank you. There are some good questions here. And have we still got Lisa there? Lisa Barbara Rossa. Are you still there, Lisa? Can you come off mute and ask your question? Lisa there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I can see you all. I thought you could. My question was, and I guess this came up in our room briefly, but around growing up, I guess, bilingual, do you think that bilingualism per se is a tool that we can sort of use to increase cultural awareness? Because certainly in the case of myself, I was born in Melbourne and grew up in Melbourne, but my parents were born overseas, both in Italy, parents and grandparents. So growing up in the Italian community was a big part of, I guess, my childhood and earlier years. And I speak fluent Italian, and then, later on starting a business with China, living overseas for a little while in Hong Kong and going to China a couple of times a year, I felt that I sort of struggled. Well, I didn't struggle. I struggled less, if you like, than some of my peers who didn't have that bilingual background to begin with. So I'm just interested in Tracy's thoughts.
Yeah, and thank you. Totally forgot to talk about language. It's a huge one. I mean, for me personally, my Chinese is so-so. I'm not fluent. So that really speaks a lot to my minimization. I only did what I needed to do to get by. My daughters, on the other hand, have been brought up bilingual, and I just think they're so lucky. And really, to understand a culture properly, you need to learn the language. And I clearly haven't gone there far enough yet. So I see the problem with myself, but I also see the advantage that my daughters have. And absolutely, learning another language just makes you realize that your way of doing things is not the only way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with Tracy. Like, having another language or another two languages is definitely an advantage. It's easier, it's faster to get connected to the level that is deeper below the iceberg. But I'm sure Tracy have seen, a lot of leaders when they do JV joint venture in China. I remember Daniel, the French leader who couldn't speak Chinese at all, but he had to communicate with and really connect with the Chinese, very, very Chinese leader. And during the joint venture, I observed him, he tried very hard, right? I mean, he really had that acceptance, no judgment, he really tried to connect and understand their culture and really use translator and try to understand what is the best way to build trust. So he really built the Guanxi, even though he did not speak much Chinese, but eventually to me he is really culturally very sensitive as well. So I would think that thank you.
Yeah, Damien, he didn't master the language, but he understood the importance of it. So he was always making sure that he understood the meaning behind what they were saying and making sure that there was always a translator present so that people could communicate in their native tongue. And because so much is lost in bad translation, actually.
Yes.
Tracy and Polly, one of the things we've talked about, which I think is interesting, is I think there's a tendency to assume that the more time you spend with people of other cultures, the more adaptive and accepting you become. But you mentioned to me that you've worked with people who've had very little exposure to different cultures, but are actually very adaptive. So maybe could you explain that a bit? Because that sort of is counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, I met not many. I mean, a few people, a few leaders in China. They did not live abroad and they have not worked abroad. But in the surrounding, he has a lot of friends from different cultures. So he make a point to meet up with people from different cultures and try to understand. Remember the acceptance there. Curious, very curious to learn and about other people's culture, and also suspend your judgment. So long as you have the mindset of that suspend judgment, curiosity, and really connect with people below the waterline, I think that is more important than you going overseas. I have also seen leaders they have lived in Dubai for 12 years, and when I asked him, how do you spend your free time, he said, I visit the British pub every weekend. So that explains whether you are curious to learn, you want to learn, and how do you suspend your judgment, being a British kind of lenses, and try to, you know, understand deep in that sense. So I have met people who have not lived abroad, and they are at that kind of level. So thank you, David, for asking the question.
Yes, well, we've got 5 minutes. Would anyone else like to come off mute and ask a question now that we've got a moment? Angus in particular has been quite active in the chat. Do you want to ask a question, Angus? Not too political, please.
I think you're still on mute.
There was thanks, David. There's a lot of points that came to mind, which I just tabled for general sharing. But one point, one of the last points I made was the fact that we do, as Australians, generally see things not as our Asian friends do in bilateral relationships. We tend to think about, you know, how many visitors are going to come to Australia to see Australia. We don't think in the context, well, we should be thinking about how many people should be visiting China to understand China. So we do tend to think in terms of a unilateral relationship, not working towards establishing bilateral relationships. If we did that, the cultural interface, I think, would be more greatly improved.
For sure.
So, Tracy, I just wondered if you agreed with that proposition.
Well, you know, when I hear that, it speaks to general leadership and adult development, actually. It's that shift from self-importance and me, the center of the universe, to understand that actually I need to interact and collaborate and go out. And then beyond that, you realize that actually we're all sort of part of the same game, and that actually it needs to be a lot more integral than that. So I think that's, yeah, absolutely part of normal adult and leadership development, to shift from self to to understanding the need for collaboration, then to actually do it. And definitely if we want to strengthen ties and break down walls and get rid of all that rubbish that we're hearing in the media right now, then it's necessary.
Just on that point, Tracy, may I say some years ago, I happened to be in a small group that met with the chief executive of Haier, which is a major white goods manufacturer, now a global leader. He made the very strong point that China needs to collaborate. His company needs to collaborate. In fact, his company is a world leader in open innovation.
We've done work with Haier, actually, and interestingly, Polly spends a lot of time working with Chinese leaders who are needing to go out and work overseas. So yeah, there's a big movement on that in China, understanding that they need to increase their cultural awareness. And I think, actually, Polly, you might say something on this, but I do think that a lot of Chinese leaders are in an even more difficult position than a lot of Australian leaders in terms of this continuum, because, you know, in China, there really weren't many foreigners until not so long ago, and culturally foreigners were not interesting. And
if I can comment on that, like for a diverse team, for instance, you want to integrate two like major JV like Australian and Chinese team together, you need to have the conversation among the two groups. It's just not the Chinese understanding the Australian culture when they go to Australia, but you want innovation, you need to have the integration of the two cultures. That's where the sparks will begin. Well, there will be conflicts. That's where, you know, you have like new innovation and creation. So it's just not one way. Like you come to my culture, you adapt if you're living there, okay. But if you want to like, you know, collaborate, you know, you need to have the two. That is the ideal. And like Tracy said, it takes a longer time for a diverse team to kind of storm and norming, right? Compared to a monocultural kind of team, it's very easy. Everybody understands each other very quickly, speaks the same language, values. but for diverse team, it takes a longer time to have the conversation, and you need to have that kind of conversation.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I make a comment, please? I'm sorry there's no camera here. I think one of the biggest problems we suffer with in Australia is the narrowness of the ownership of our commercial media. Because for most of the population, most of what they see and hear is filtered through the incredible ignorant bias of the Murdoch media and the other commercial media. And then our politicians in turn are influenced by that, because really all they're interested in is getting back in at the next election. And I think this is a huge problem for Australia, is the narrowness of dialogue, open dialogue, and a lack of bias in this country that we just don't take on board. And nowhere is that more apparent at the moment than with China.
I absolutely agree with you. Listen, I've just realized, David, we've got about 3 minutes left. So I think I'd better hand back to you now and let you wrap up. But I just want to say a really big thank you for welcoming me and Polly to the group today. And thank you for your attention.
Yes, and thank you, Tracy. And maybe this is a good chance for us all to practice our reactions. So a nice show of hands, please, for Tracy and Polly. Thank you. And I hope you've all enjoyed that little journey. I certainly have, and I'm still doing it. Personally, I was quite shocked when I realized that I had, quite a long way to go to move just beyond minimization. I think it's a good wake-up call for everybody that if we want to embrace the opportunities of the Asian century, which we do, if we want to do business with China, which I know many of us do, if when this current crisis and sort of nonsense comes to an end, we see the opportunities for us to reach out to China as we do, I think developing our cultural intelligence will be the key to being successful. So the first step was to come to today's webinar, and I'm glad that you all have, because I think we've had a really good opening discussion about it. But the second step, I think, is to do the IDI assessment yourselves. And I've noticed in the group, one or two have suggested that might be a good next step, and I agree. I think, like I did, I think you should all do the IDI assessment. And so within the next half an hour, we'll send you an email with a link. We've negotiated a special deal through Polly. Polly is an accredited IDI assessor, so she's responsible for the use of the tool. It takes about 20 minutes to do. There's about 50 different questions, which those of you who are familiar with profiling will be quite comfortable to go through. We've put together a little package which we hope is really affordable for everybody. As I said, we'll send you a link to register for that and to make a small payment to do it. But what we've done is we've included the tool so that you can all complete it, and then a debrief with Polly in person so that she can point out what it means. She can identify some of the areas for development, and of course she can answer your questions. So you'll receive an email within the next half an hour which gives you the link to do that. If you don't receive it in the next half an hour, then for some reason you've dropped off our registration list, so please reach out and email us to support@acsme.com.au, and I'll make sure that you get that link, which is a private link for everybody in this group. So you'll see that very soon. So it's now exactly 2 o'clock. I promised you we would finish. I'm happy to hang around for a little bit afterwards, and maybe Tracy and Polly will too, in case anyone has some questions. But thank you again for being part of our first ACSME national webinar. We're planning to do one every month from now on. I hope they'll be as interesting and engaging as this one has been. And I know that we've got some really interesting speakers and topics lined up. So please come again and mention it to your friends and colleagues that ACSME is very much looking forward to when we're going to be engaging with China again. And I think the future of our economy and our country will depend on us doing a much better job than we've been doing in the last few days and weeks. And I think attending to our CQ is a great place to start. So thanks everyone for being here. And as I say, we'll be around for a little bit longer if anybody wants to hang around and ask questions. For now, let's end our webinar now. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.